Yes. So, good morning, everyone. So, let us start the session with a prayer. Page number 6. Soji Jonala Chanju Bade Dani Jazuji Ndage Jinzoji Be Tsonamji Ndola Binji Sanji Ndoba Sho Sanji Soji Jonala Chanju Bade Dani Jazuji Ndage Jinzoji Be Tsonamji Ndola Binji Sanji Ndoba Sho Sanji Soji Jonala Chanju Bade Dani Jazuji Ndage Jinzoji Be Tsonamji Ndola Binji Sanji Ndoba Sho Samjian Dangji Dewa Dan Dewe Judan Demba Juji Dunye Dan Dunye Ge Judan Trewa Juji Dunye Mebe Dewa Damba Dame Dewa Juji Nyeren Chadan Nidan Tewe Danyan Chimbola Nebar Juji Samjian Tangji Dewa Dan Dewe Judan Demba Juji Dunye Dan Dunye Ge Judan Trewa Juji Dunye Mebe Dewa Damba Dame Dewa Juji Nyeren Chadan Nidan Tewe Danyan Chimbola Nebar Juji Samjian Tangji Dewa Dan Dewe Judan Demba Juji Dunye Dan Dunye Ge Judan Trewa Juji Dunye Mebe Dewa Damba Dame Dewa Juji Nyeren Chadan Nidan Tewe Danyan Chimbola Nebar Juji
아니, 참말로 그저대 오셔이라. 나타링 저지 이제 네가 파신 투르마도 안 되는 막 가지 찾아치라. 되신데.
So I hope all of you are keeping well, and now we will continue with our discussion on the root text itself. So from this point onwards, I think we arrive at the exploration of what is called the 6 great perfections, and we will try to explore this as extensively as we can.
아니, 단다 제세라는 서대나라 파신 투셔단다 아니 라마치바나 이제 냠도 도지나 집바로 레더라. 이제 디니제시는 저도 과마 알아야 돼 펜토레선.
So we will explore the 6 great perfections in conjunction with the presentation on the same from another text called the Guru Puja, or the offering to the Gurus.
다 된다디르샤 파시 투나로 담보 파시 투는 것은 와이나라 아니 젬베 파시 수중지 파시 즈베 파시 즌두기 파시 아니 시락 파시 파자 젬바 수중 즈바 즈바다 아니 즌두 삼된 시락 대 파시
So before we begin to discuss the 6 great perfections, I think it is better to enumerate what exactly are the 6 great perfections. So the 6 great perfections are in this order: the great perfection of generosity, the great perfection of ethical conduct, the great perfection of forbearance, the great perfection of joyous effort, the great perfection of meditative stabilization or concentration, the great perfection of wisdom. Okay. So the great perfections are in this order. First, the great perfection of generosity. Second, the great perfection of ethical conduct. Third, the great perfection of forbearance. Fourth, the great perfection of joyous effort. Fifth, the great perfection of meditative stabilization or concentration. And finally, sixth, the great perfection of wisdom.
저도 뒤에 말하죠. 근데 인데 다 먼저 파신 두이면 나로라 당봉가데 타부차라. 아니 담마데 아니 시래구차. 근데 시셔보라 탑신이 세상에서 직 타바다 단지 전부 고발 로 제발라 탑도 시럽니기 메전친 로고야. 베너디 지우로를 빼샤와나 쇼파니를 땡고다. 그래서 탑지부도나 도마도 시럽지부 찬도나 도마 인자를 땡고 만나시 땡고 만나시 베드 가르샤스나 베네 자지파 지푸고에나 쇼파니를 땡고 쇼파찌기 부두고마라. 오 딘데로 샤고 이제 개천보인 거지라.
So then when we look at these six great perfections, the first five are what we call the methods, and the sixth is the wisdom. So in Buddhist spiritual practice, we place a lot of importance on being able to establish a union of method and wisdom in order to achieve the ultimate spiritual goal of enlightenment, or ultimate spiritual goal of liberation and enlightenment. And just as a bird needs both wings to fly, so similarly, if one is to effectively cultivate a spiritual path that leads them towards liberation and enlightenment, one needs to cultivate and train in both wisdom and method.
तदि करले न अने सांचुन देबे चावा श्लोका निशिचांगा पा데체라 아니 상준 देबे 류장 땅 거나스 다진 저도 된데 상주 전부 터야라 아니 수수기 류연진데 전부 땅 거와이나 와 아니 쇼롱어 보면은 아주 중요다 생물 상자다 지 세고도 가르이나 도저데 따치밀라네 도저데 인데 안자장 레스라 수수기 류 전부터 땅 토나데 데실로도 다 칼라 땅 투에 임바다 땅 거야지 레스 대시르 다야 땅 미네고래 안조 가르치고서는 만부지 전부터 땅에나 지대 추지기 어서 돈이 지게 소소라 땅다 현다다 아니 지 칼로다 미기 통수야 보용으로서 근데 장장지가랑 점점 미도는 소소기 전부터 장마지 책이요 말아 근데 인디가 아니 지 랜라나 소소라양 오게 파지 지와는 알아 주마치 지기서 랜라므려 나메다 이봐 나메를 단단히 전부터 주망알아야 지 lon전조야 근데라 팬토로서 근데라므려 아니 지게 칼로 땅다 현다도 졸라므려 아니 젬바 칼 근데기 젬바디 칼라는 것도 지단기 젬바 파신들라 칼로나 동생 춘데데 젬바 젬베 파신디는 코수 미미바 라 파기 랑 파tin 서버자는 동반이라 바자르라 동색이 유체 아니 동약이 제체 동바포도 참아 코수 미미바를라데 따라시 두바메바 라 딘데질라 바 samtam tang tu na penone jembe jeman namda chayira taine ngara zu jamda jende jingor mi kyo de la chi jingor da chi len da thabala ta gora odine mai ba ko resam.
Now verse number 25th, the practice of all the bodhisattvas is to give out of generosity with no hopes of karmic recompense or expectation or of reward. For if those who seek awakening must give even their own bodies, what need is there to mention mere outer objects and possessions? So herein, in the cultivation of generosity as a perfection, or even when we begin to practice generosity in our lives, it is important that the manner in which we practice generosity, the intention of practicing generosity should not be informed or influenced by worldly concerns of gain, fame, pleasure, prestige, and so forth. And it should always come from a pure motivation. And now, if someone who seeks the awakening mind of bodhicitta is to practice the perfection of generosity, then one must be willing even to give up their own bodies as a part of their practice of generosity. So what need is there to mention mere outer objects and possessions? So this is the extent towards which a bodhisattva in training in the great perfections must be willing to go, that they must be willing to sacrifice their own bodies if it comes to that. Now, when we are talking about generosity, if we approach it from a worldly point of view, then it is important to ensure that when we are engaging in acts of generosity, that it should not be done with a sense of this being reciprocated, or this it should not be influenced by a sense that you will gain some good karma out of it, solely motivated by that fact. It should come from a pure motivation to help others. Now, from a more spiritual point of view, and even here, when we look at it from a very subtle spiritual point of view, then in the cultivation of generosity as a part of the 6 great perfections, one must ensure that the act of generosity itself must be embraced by the view of emptiness, wherein when you begin to practice generosity, the object towards whom you are practicing generosity should be viewed as intrinsically, not intrinsically existent. And similarly, the material thing, time, whatever you want to give to them, this object, this material thing, time, possession, whatever, should also be viewed as intrinsically not existent. Not intrinsically existent. And similarly, the subject themselves, the one who is practicing generosity, one should view the subject themselves as not intrinsically existent.
Tantanda di la shangshu de lu chang tang de gona do la ji to pen di la ngzo kare kun de sha na ni ma tang mo lu jin ga sra ta pen sanje chang de ko to kuma la ani de ka wa che de ani koran tu ju la shangshu gu sen de de tu ye za ani koran pe ni ji chen bo che ni ra ani sa je la ta pe tanda ngzo tang mo lu jin la de pe yu do je do ra di sa je de pe do la yin sa ra ani तागे आमाजिला पुगु माबुजे ताठु माबुचे अनि दजु समा तोक्सी थेदो छेदिरा अनि दिने इदिगला अनि खोरांगी धन्डे वेजेसे संजि त बदु जिग निता साजेगी कोथो खोमा खोमा र तेगी जिने अनि खोरांगी लुदिफा गेम्बा तांगला रा ताठु दजु माशे छि 제가 दजु ngone थानेगी पेदा ngजु सायुलेन्डे बाइरा ताइने दिने यो मारबला तिसागा खासी दोआ सोसोगी 그래서 개마 좀 받다니로 라미도 타로 근데 땅이 수저서 도와 지단게 이게래 가서 하마고 하면더라 너종은에 럽침보라 나란서도 스스 직배션 누구 직당라나 깔래 커버라 라 저 집어도 배 항상이라.
So when we look at a particular line like for if, the last 2 lines, for if those who seek awakening must give even their own bodies, what need is there to mention mere outer objects and possessions? Now, when it says, for if those who seek awakening must give even their own bodies, now it is said that in one of his previous lives, the Buddha was born in a particular area in a particular area where there was a tiger who has just given birth to cubs, and at that point the Buddha had already generated within himself the awakening mind of bodhicitta. And when he saw the tigress and the cubs, he began to realize that the mother was not in a condition to nurture and to care for the cubs at all. She wasn't able to do that. She was in such a weak condition. So at that moment, it is said that the Buddha took it upon himself to cut off his limbs and gradually feed the mother his own flesh in order to ensure that the cubs do not die. And the pilgrimage site, we can visit it to this day. It's in Nepal. And this is the kind of practices that a Bodhisattva is able to engage in. Now, when we think about this kind of examples, maybe we might get the impression that maybe this is a little bit beyond us. This is not really realistic at all. But if we think carefully about it, even in this day and age, there are many, many examples of, if not giving up our whole bodies, but there are many examples wherein people begin to donate their organs for those who are in need of them, people who donate blood, and this all constitutes the act of generosity, being able to let go of one's own organs, one's own blood, and so forth.
다 단달라마 치바 나로라 가르송우들네 다 지난 더부도 제라 식테스티즈 만다지미시 nensunguda lu dang longje ta lu la na tan da dosa sa longje la na ga jo longje peshan kare na de bora lu dang longje je ta te mai be tu sun ge so la de ga la so so ge gwa hama da de ba sa sha ba de na tan da sa sha ba ina re mong bo sa ban ju wi gwa tin de wi ge cho tang je ani shen la tang wa shen la ho ra tin de ge sam ta ya te ya kare la na simjen ran ran de bi ngo ji te la de ga la chik so so le jo longje kare tang ai ba ina ya 신진 대다 대라 고고디 주니 당아서 그 로이 편바 나라 가라 이어바디 콜라 그 변에 추고발아 치공 치칼로 칼라고발아 칼라 가리네 딘데질로 봐 유튜브 매번제고 해서라 심지어랑 데비 응어지때 아니 젬바 빠땅비 내고래야 아니 차바매 봐 항상 전전 빠땅도 가라 방세제 아 당아 마단 따다 이사인데 뭐양 이도 저거라서 항상 방세제라 딘데메 봐아 참이 아니 동생을 되가 빠똥이 생방아 파떼고 선라 딘데 빼위 아니 명아키스 딘데 있다 명아라는 지단기다 라마 고마고마마마에 뭐야 명아라 지래래 딘데 위게 아니 동생 빼와다 아니 들 차바메베 고네 아니 젬바 땅와도 딘데 위데 젬베 파신 조바 신지라우스라라
Yes. So now when we look at the manner in which the practice of the perfection of generosity is presented in the other texts, Guru Puja or offering to the gurus, then it's very similar. So your own body, your own possessions, and the accumulation of virtues and the virtues that you have accumulated in the 3 times you dedicate them to sentient beings, taking into account the needs of each sentient beings and giving these without any sense of attachment and regret. This is the great perfection of generosity.
다 단다 니스타루바디라 타나가 제셀라네나라 카르손나나 스투메바 란데 문두베스 지당한저 소수기 레가지 채워야나 지둥라나 딱딱딱다 도고라 지추데 데바니만 소수 레가야 두마레스 소수기다 지금 러시아니도 주신 지든지 사신 나올 거를 뒤즈다다다 직송고야 제고야 따다다 맞이나 알아서 레가도 두고다 아스라 문두나 되는지 문두 와이나 아니 젠데 두게 가서 젠데 하바도 제바기 되게 로지 지기나는 무지 게무시에게 들이스 소소기 내가 따다야 두마도지 아니 미기 지기 내가 지기나는 라다 고대오존 시와이나 진짜 가서 젠데 둘라는 다 자체무시라 아 딘데기데 아니 게무시에게 내도 책이레스 딘데 인상 대시르스 진짜 대다 딘데라 때니 아니 시비 덤바 당가서 그 시비게 덤바다 시비 대와라 차비 덤바도 줄래서라 덤바 메바이다 시비 대와라 아니 차신 메바이 고네스 아니 수중 파신 조바신질라 가서 수중라디다 가서 지 룡아예수 고숨야 여와 페나가서 류라 나다이 따페나 류이잖아요 류질레 넘버 송아게 넘버 시 얘기 넘버 송 드려요라 지선 도 참 수중 양다바지 송고레스라 수중 송아 제셀라리 데데달라레 츠젠데 제와데 제세 샴지셈바도 냠네레스.
Now moving on, verse number 26. The practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to observe ethical restraint without the slightest intention of continuing in samsaric existence. For lacking discipline, one will never secure even one's own well-being. So any thought of bringing benefit to others will be absurd. So maybe we start from the last 2 lines. For lacking discipline, one will never secure even one's own well-being. And so any thought of bringing benefit to others would be absurd. Now this is true. If one has no sense of personal discipline in cultivating an ethical restraint, then how can you ensure your own well-being? You yourself will give in to negative emotions and you yourself will engage in negative actions. So without first cultivating a personal sense of restraint in not engaging in unethical actions, then how can we even begin to think about being of benefit to others? Because your own actions are harmful not only to yourself but to others too. So how can you possibly think about benefiting others. This is laughable. So as such, the practice of the Bodhisattvas is to observe ethical restraint in not engaging in the negative actions that spring from the body, speech and mind, without the slightest intention of continuing in samsaric existence. Now herein maybe the translation is a little bit off. In the original Tibetan it says without the slightest intention of pursuing samsaric pleasure.
다 단다 라마 주변에 갈래드는 레다 소타라 샹세 상다 간다 간다 동바스메라 근데 주중순라 되게 소타게 동바 샹세게 동바 상하게 동바 된데게 동바 제삼 속에 시험 메당와라디 소소게 딱 켈렌 사주디 베드 실레 투베네 아니 동바디 마동 라 당아저 찌게 소소 켈렌 장가 단다 지 칼로 꾸마르지 크메라나 다치 도고또 시도 제나야 지 따지 칼라로 지 꾸마거야 고 따고 칼로 네버지 버디나 당가 신의 개마랑아 그마다 나의 그 메사에 된대기 제선 속이 시험마다 시 내걸 두에네 아니 된대기 소소게 dom바도 마슨 가서 마당에 송한다고라 제선 속이 시험 메동 예스 소소선 제선 시험마다 신이스라 아니 다 개와 주도다 선제 된대기 주름 다 던점 주름을 샤오라 던조 갈나 안 던조 양다 바송바디 아니 주름 파시 좀 하신지 라오스 데데 아니 가르스나 젬바다 주름 거 파시 레라오라.
So now similarly when we look at the Guru Puja, in Guru Puja it talks about how even at the face of death to not let go of our vows and to observe ethical conduct, that is the great perfection of wisdom. That is the great perfection of ethical restraint or ethical conduct. Now herein, when we are talking about vows in the Buddhist spiritual practice, ethical restraint and ethical conduct is very much linked with the vows that one takes to not engage in negative actions. So there are many different sets of vows, such as individual liberation vows, Bodhisattva vows, and so forth. So even at the face of death, to not let go of these vows that you take, that is the great perfection of ethical restraint. So it might be the case that you have taken such vows, individual liberation vows, and so forth, and in these there are sets of negative actions that you vow not to engage in. For example, it might be that in this set of vows, you take it upon yourself not to engage ever in the act of stealing. And now, even at the face of death, when you are in a no man's land, and you are very, very hungry, and then you have an opportunity to steal something. But even in such a situation, still to hold on to our ethical restraint, that is the perfection of ethical conduct.
다 니시 자든바디라 디 가스나 트릉 말에 주베 파시 와 아니 게벨 노주 가서 게벨 노주 데비 제셀라 제세남스라 제타 제셀라 게베기 노타 게베기 쳬도 주베 노주를 빼내서라 된데 데버치비기 제셀라 제세 상주선 받더라 아니 더조 가르라나 뇌지 탐지 렌신 때르단 총라 뇌지 단지 소소라 된데비 제세 상주 좀 소소 게벨 노주라 아니 데비기 제세 상주선 받더조 간데로 주르라나 지금 뇌지 상만 간저 뇌지 무즈바 뇌지를 막아와 뇌지를 파 다른 땅고에 내버려라 콘조 가르려나 뇌지 탐지 렌신 때르 총라디가라 콘조라 간저 렌신기 때 림부치지라네 가나다 아니 소소 다포야 버자와다 들페 트로나요라 제가 콘솔라 가르라나 지금 미기 슐로기 뇌지 dun조에 갈라나 단도 렌치 때나시기 옆에나 들으니 바나시기 아니 갈 초아되어레스 가이스나 콘솔라 저버검사 유요라 어디래서라 대실 건라 신데미지바 제가 된대기 파기라 미기 아니 철나라 뇌지 땅우디가라 안 들레파라 신데마지 파 마가와 마제네 아니 저버검바디 이제 상주선바도 아니 냠네레라라.
Now moving on, verse number 27th. The practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to cultivate patience, forbearance, free from any trace of animosity towards anyone at all, since any potential source of harm is like a precious treasure to the Bodhisattva who is eager to enjoy a wealth of virtue. Now, someone who trains in the awakening mind of bodhicitta, who cultivates this altruistic intention in their conduct, looks at potential sources of harm, sources of harm as not something that one becomes averse towards, not something that one turns away from. They actually cherish these potential sources of harm like a priceless treasure, because a bodhisattva understands that these potential sources of harm are the perfect objects of tolerance, perfect objects of forbearance. So as such, they treasure them, they cherish them, and they approach these sources of harm with joy.
Ne lama chöba nangla de la da khamsu chigu mali ra khamsu chigu mali thuji de sheshi chande sheshi chande di shi soje chance mitu ne pheba dushi be zebe phashen zoba shenje la ta de la de gala khamsu chigu mali be na khamsu de kasana de khamsu kan zume kham chigu mali la na ta dinalo yebin ro simje tamje dira sosolo chöba ina yas pe de hansa ye pe jachem bujire da she싱라는 소소의 she시 당라 창도월의 기처럼이 지연도 때는 이미라 미티라 아코도자지 mambola 창도 디힌라 딩아저 동대 당 동화도 되네 라 디히 계속 소체바 있나요 아스라 소체 짱다 딘데지 제와는 아주 저거 검토고 말아 라 이니야 안 들어 가르쳐올라나 제세신 선바도 냠니 제단 들어 갈나 무투바 들어봐 투바 마제네 딘데 늘레 마제네 아니 무투 늘레 펜바 두시바 단도파 파 펜바 두야 팔로 록버체 딘데기 펜세이지라 딘데위데 아니 가르스나 제베 파신 조바신 딘데기 냠네 제베데 아니 제베 파신 레스라 딘데위 아니 로드라니라 제와쇼라 다 신지라 버쇼라다 제베 파신 조바신 라스 제베 파신 조바다
Sobara.
Zobar.
Now, similarly, from the Guru Puja, it reads, even if all the sentient beings in the three realms, the three realms of desire, form and formless realms, even if all the sentient beings in the three realms become averse towards me, begin to denigrate me, begin to assault me, and even threaten to kill me, not to retaliate, but to have the wish to be of help and to be of service to them, that is the great perfection of forbearance.
다 니시자지 받으라. 티카를라나 쩐두 파신 제마 추루수바. 다 쩐두레서. 쩐두 파신 저바 되게 쩐두 파신 시워. 딜란 칼라나 란덤 바시 두비니랑 양슬라. 다 같은 저 대바송이라 년대라제 대바송이라. 다 된데가 단다 니랑라데 니테다라제 니 대바충으로 오셔. 자. 대면제 아니 대체라는 다 제세 상주서마 라주라 상주고 센체 사주도 대바침고 테스로라 대한을 단다디가 란덤 바시 두비 니랑 당알데 년대다 라제니디 라기 된다면 젠데산의 자침부 tanto고 말라 라니 아니 대화타야다 라니 타바타야다 라니지 ngonto hada mi ko man tawe chang chen de nye de ra de ji ane de nye ge jila ane nyera la de ne nyera du ju gi su su gi pe de tabada thangji chen bi ko man tawe ge de ne san je chen ta ma tu gi bi kansa de ju ina ra random bashi du su su chi bu ta da du bala de ne gi kale ji jawo ina sla ra khunzu kande kale khandas jawo la na ngol mesho karsa mesho dokar sun thonis checha 남들가 좀 소소 골 메셔나다 답비디 메디바 때에 치드 메디 세에 치드 가서 빼 감라다 요라 라 인지미지 메디바 세토야라 빼 추쇼 고도 메 로발랑 고도 딱 하는 탑시 땅으로 와 티나시기 니랑도 조이나 소소 쳔디 지보 자자다 아니 타바 짬터야다 아니 모두 하다 메 고만터야 짬실에 딘데기 빼되고 골 메셔바나시 칼레 제고나 라 딘데기 좀 봐도 통네 땅 저기 제세 상주 선바도다 안 사제도 저기 갈라나 로커 선수치부 많이 로 심제 용시던드라 로커 텐데스 로 심제 당지기 텐데 연데 유네스다 텐데 마카라 서소기 지 연데 상만 주세기 내라 텐데 어디 갈라나 전주 파신 줘 파신제 라스
Now moving on 28th, the practice of all the bodhisattvas is to strive with enthusiastic diligence to strive with joyful effort, the source of all good qualities when working for the sake of all who live. Seeing that even Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas who labor for themselves alone exert themselves as if urgently trying to extinguish fires upon their heads. Now herein, as we already discussed, that the generation of the awakening mind of bodhicitta is the door through which one enters the Mahayana path. And when we are talking about the different traditions in Buddhism, we talk about them in terms of vehicles, smaller vehicle and greater vehicle. So the Mahayana vehicle is the greater vehicle, and the smaller vehicle refers to the Theravada. And as such, the difference in them lies in the scope of the motivation with regards to spiritual practice. So Shravakas or hearers and Pratyeka Buddhas or solitary realizers are individuals who dedicate themselves towards their own individual liberation. Their concern is not one of liberating all sentient beings from samsaric existence. So as such, seeing that even hearers and Pratyeka Buddhas who labor for themselves alone exert themselves as if urgently trying to extinguish fires upon their heads. So even the individuals who seek only their own liberation, when we look at the manner in which they exert themselves in their spiritual path, wherein they address they address the negative emotions, they apply themselves to the spiritual path as if with the urgency that is similar to trying to extinguish a fire in their heads, then as someone who wants to cultivate the Mahayana path, then it goes without saying that one must have great enthusiasm in the cultivation of their spiritual path. One must have great perseverance in cultivating the spiritual path.
Simjen riri shen narmi be mena keba jatsi nego jan hinji munjo shanchu chunzen bi tsundu pashin zoba shinji la sum. Tadi sun undi gala ta simjen riri shen simjen chigi tanda ya ra anzo men nalo la keba ja nego wa ina tindegi anzo kale jatungi ra. Tabi na anzo mi chigi tanda la keba jata pashin shabu chigi chutu chigi da kale khabro ra. Kamanga guya kale khawda anzo tindegi mi chi shimbe gilan da chela. Chetan tindegi jata shanshi sambadza khasana simje chigi tanda, simje riri shiang nami bila digala chigi kalo nami bi esra mena keba jata soso tindegi mena newa ina pe cawu soso pe kalo shibu ji nyangkawa tindegi jorwa tindegi mena nana keba jatso nashi pe tablop chenpo tindegi negoba ina yans hingi mocha tanda kunzo la chigi senpa la chana da nga tindegi chetun marisa lo diyo marisa hingi me cho shangchu cho zunbi tindegi ane chigi simjengi tanda simje chigi tanda ina keba jala soba netuwegi tindegi logi kalo ta hintaw jorwa tindegi ane zundu pashin zoba shinji laos tindegi zundu pashin chidangi nga zundu la digala gashin to shinji nidala ane zundu shawra zunga gelo to wala jo nga duri jaba chibu mayra tona yope gone ane chigi wala tona yopa chigi chajajila nga zundu shawra tindegi lola.
So similarly, when we look at the Guru Puja, then it says that for the sake of each and every sentient being, even if you have to suffer in the pits of fire for thousands of years, for aeons, not to lose heart, but to find the courage to still cultivate the awakening mind, this is the great perfection of joyful effort. So it is important to understand that from a Buddhist perspective, when we are talking about perseverance, diligence, effort, and so forth, it is always understood as that effort must be joyful, effort must be enthusiastic. So as such, the spiritual path and the effort that one puts into the spiritual path must be approached with a sense of joy and enthusiasm.
Shiloka nishi tsagu badra, di karsana nganzo samde pashi tengorwa, yamba tsuru zuba samde shiba. 다디 라디가라 시네르드 두베 시네르디 치당 가서 시네르디 센 시와라 네바로 지칼로 지금 하스유스가 상승이메 봐 시네르드 덴베 하동키스 당가서 시네다 하동라죠 어디시 오라 다시 지당 시네르디 센 직베 시와라 르르 지네네 봐 하동라디 하보통라디 지당 시르비 찌바치니 아니 지 하마동 아직 하바 통하려나 지당이 고대오치는 시에는 하동란 텐디셔라 텐데 하동 케스 다시 간다 실라 손대치는 로라 텐데 위디 가서는 뉴몬 넘버는 좀 para 시제니 텐데 시내다 하동 손대 데비고네 아니 뉴몬 넘버는 좀 발라데 뉴몬 그 자와는 좀 받아 뉴몬만 곤네바 라 좀비 아니 텐데 이 시버 체네 아니 즈미 jel레스 양다 데바이 당한저 즈미 실려한다네 당 삼대의 즈미 라주라 즈미 시리칼라나 나시타에 나카타에 찌야미 시츠라주라 즈미 실려 양다 데발라디 텔레 체겨와 봐 오데 근데 나카타에 찌야미 시츠 텔레 데바이 아니 근데 위에다 곰두 냐레도 줄레 체네 아니 삼대 곰바 제셀라네스 봐 다간저 실라다 시내다 하통다 아니 삼대라 소버든들 곰니 아니 딜레 데베기 아니 딜레 냠니 실레게 와체와이나 아니 삼대 파시 커사 삼대 곰바디 아니 제세 장주 선바도 냠네 레스
Now moving on, verse number 29. Now 29 is the great perfection of meditative stabilization or concentration. Now the practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to cultivate concentration, which utterly transcends the four formless absorptions, in the knowledge that mental afflictions are overcome entirely through penetrating insight suffused with stable calm. So stable calm insight herein refers to shamatha and vipassana. Stable calm refers to shamatha. Insight refers to vipassana, or more particularly special insight. Now the practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to cultivate concentration, which utterly transcends the four formless absorptions. So the four formless absorptions are meditative absorptions, meditative equipoise that are still very much within the realm of samsara. So the four formless absorptions are what we call first the limitless absorption, space-like absorption, and then limitless conscious absorption, and then the top of samsara absorption. That's the tip of samsara. Now from here onwards, if you transcend that meditative absorption, then you are liberated from samsaric existence. So the practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to cultivate concentration in their meditation, and to be able to cultivate a meditative stabilization that transcends the meditative absorptions of the samsaric realm, in the knowledge that mental afflictions, in the knowledge that our disturbing emotions are overcome through the union of vipassana and shamatha. Okay, so maybe we look at the last two lines. In the knowledge that mental afflictions are overcome entirely through penetrating insight suffused with stable calm. So vipassana is a form of meditation, and shamatha is also a form of meditation. Vipassana is an analytical form of meditation, and shamatha is a stabilizing kind of meditation. So wherein in shamatha you train your attention to fully concentrate on an object, and this helps us to overcome the manifest or the gross forms of afflictions. Now, if we are to address the afflictions at their root, if we are to overcome the afflictions entirely, then one must cultivate analytical meditation, which is vipassana or special insight. We call this special because it's an insight that we do not have beforehand. It is only through the cultivation of meditation on emptiness that we begin to gain this special insight, which helps us to address the mental afflictions from their root, to overcome. So if we use an analogy, if we are to ensure that a weed or a tree doesn't grow, cutting at the branches doesn't help. We need to take the root itself out. So that is the purpose of special insight meditation, to be able to address the afflictions from their roots. So now we understand this better. In the knowledge that mental afflictions are overcome entirely from their roots through penetrating insight, through vipassana, suffused with stable calm, through the union of shamatha and vipassana, only then can we overcome our mental afflictions entirely.
Tanda lama chube nalo ya hingu number yemi chembang nesra chugun demba tobe nelu la zeji nyamba zobe tingzenchi samden passion zoba shinjila la ah tene indi da jingu la di jingwa la di nganzo gulo zamzang nganzo na to num ro de da su kale de ka chi ten chwe mejo lo jo chena nge mejo teblo lo sik samata gomjana kharina chik na to num ro de da tele jingwa che gobal din zamzang nganzo bed semba yoni sem digan sa shatung da lega khar chen san khar tang be cham ru da on tinde wi jingu number yinwa da dinde gi pa nganzo yinwa chame yinwa di chön la shan de ba pang go nesra pang ne 아니 다 가정 디바 반 가정은 지금 덴버도 봐. 최 단식이 내룰러라. 덴베 똥비 내룰라라디 다 간다 똥바니라라는데 오라. 제가 최근에 덴버 두베기 똥와이 바데. 라. 근데 이제 내룰라디 다 똥이라샤. 아 지금 덴베 또 내룰라. 다 간다 똥이라 째지디 냠바샤라. 째지 냠바 조비 띵제지. 근데 이 똥이라 아니 째지디 냠바 샤비게 아니 띵엔젠. 라. 띵엔젠지 아니 딘데 띵인젤라 텔라테네 아니 something passion 조바 신질라 없으라 아니 something 기 passion 아니 나줄라 째와다 딘데 기 신질라 버셔스.
So now similarly when we look at the Guru Puja, then in Guru Puja it explores it a little bit further, wherein it says to abandon and to overcome all forms of distractions in dullness and excitement that arises in our meditative experiences, and to stabilize the attention, to abide in the meditative stabilization that recognizes all phenomena lack intrinsic nature, or to stabilize the mind in meditation on emptiness. This is the great perfection of concentration. So dullness and excitement are the greatest obstacles one faces in meditation. Dullness is when the mind becomes too withdrawn into itself. It becomes heavy, wherein the mind is not able to engage the object of meditation effectively at all. And excitement is when the mind becomes too uplifted. It becomes agitated, so as such it's easily distracted towards outer sensory objects. So to overcome dullness and excitement in meditative experience, and to be able to place the attention equanimously on the realization that that all phenomena lack intrinsic nature, or to stabilize the mind on the realization of emptiness. This is the great perfection of concentration or meditative stabilization.
다 순치바데 시럽하진지라 다 시럽 미나 바로 생아이라다 제가 시럽 타마들 시럽하시야 근데 이 시럽하시는데 매바이나 아니 응엘라 바로 생방가서 젬바 츠르즈바 츠르 삼네 디버도 응아디 있으라 생아이 조비상 주터버 미니베레디 근데 아 저랑기 도지기레데 아니 근데 시럽 바지 매바이나 아니 바로 생방가디기 아니 상주 더 두고 말해서 그런 집을 나오다 아 근데 인자 터당 대신레다 근데 녜라 슈샤주게 파싱가다 드드데 라줄레 데마다 아니 코스 무토빌레데 단다 시레고 파신 라 코스 무토비 시레 아 코스물레 단장아서레서 젬바젠자 아니 렘보똥보토라다 디나로 요르 카르서니 쩐주나로 요 딱한다 코스물레데 젬바 땅서 유다 땅보보다 땅지게 제유라 그 참아 코스 미미비 또베 든서마라시게 두바메바 덴버 두바메바 또비 근데 이 시레 gomba ani jese shamju sambada sa nyamne resla.
So now moving on, verse number 30th. The practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to cultivate wisdom beyond the three conceptual spheres alongside skillful means. Since it is not possible to attain the perfect level of awakening through the other 5 paramitas herein referring to the perfections, through the other 5 paramitas alone in wisdom's absence. So without cultivating wisdom, even if you train and cultivate all the other 5 great perfections, it is not possible to attain the perfect awakening mind or enlightenment. And now the first 2 lines. The practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to cultivate wisdom beyond the 3 conceptual spheres. So as we discussed in the exploration of the great perfection of generosity, how the object, the subject, and the experience itself should be looked at as not being intrinsically existent, not being intrinsically established. So this is exactly what we mean by the 3 conceptual spheres. So in the act of generosity, the one who is practicing generosity should be viewed as not being intrinsically established. The thing that you want to give to others, the time, thing, material possession, that too should be viewed as not being intrinsically established. And similarly, the person to whom you want to give these things, the object, this also should be viewed as not intrinsically established. So these are the 3 conceptual spheres. So the practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to cultivate wisdom that transcends these conceptual spheres along with skillful means. Skillful means, now as we already discussed, the first 5 perfections are methods. So the first 5 perfections are what is referring to here, skillful means.
Okay. 2 ways.
You said in 3 conceptual spheres, one is not intrinsically present, the other which we are given.
Not present, established.
The other, just like the person or the thing that we are giving, that is also not
Intrinsically established.
What's the third one?
The act itself, or the, what we call, the thing that you want to give to. Da koi dilagir, manzogi di karsa, jimba tongken diya dembar majuba, tong yu diya dembar majuba, chawa ze yana chawa diya dembar majuba.
제 먼저 최단지 데모모도 보이나 거라. 데모도 받자가 되는 예미 봐 가장 되지 레라 돈이 그라.
Because if we remember our discussion on emptiness, we say that in Buddhism, all phenomena lack intrinsic nature.
야, 다 되지다. 너무 주변으로 가르송을라나. 대니 소소 또비 시럽지 예슬라. 다 대니라디 지금 하통라야 고초라 지당한테 동반이라 고르. 대니 소소 또봐라. 돈이도 비시라지 고라라. 대니 소소 또비 시럽지 예스. 딘데비 시럽이 참비 예스라. 참비 시장 대천 당대와. 다 내가 침불에 대한 당지 침불 고반다. 딘데라 고초서래. 지당양 하에서는 자오마도 mambuji suene de tazanga de je mo gachira ani tambi hije de je tandwe tendam nyamja namke nenjoji tendambe nyambala shabara nyamja namke nenjo la dita tinde yu nenjo pa de jachesa tingsa bo pa nankana je tinde je le pe sha nenjochi ani shire bhajan zo basin jilaus chidangi shire bla dinga zo kalona chigi nelu sushen de tongye ra 지게 어딘데지래 바양 답아봐 또 단단 아주 이 가르싱이라네 뭐이네 뜻이 셰토고 말라 먼저 칼라나 남도다 진 되샤셔나 뜨무다 드바든데 딥디오엔자 뭐이네 뜻이 마치는데 또도 아 근데 이 시레 파션 아지를 제서는 최탄적이 내루 가리나 수신도 또 통이 되잖아
디 연조지 권치 소로나다 시탄다 라마추바기티
아 대니 소소또비 시럽지스라 대니라디 지당게 하송라야 고야도라 이네야 단다 대니라디가라 동반이데 든들라 소소 또벌라디 수신도 또와 라 돈이 수신도 또와 다간다 고송 미미바 수신도 또와 덴디 들라테네 아니 디 장비 대신 다 동반이기 따와디 양다바 또와이나 아니가 대화 첨불라 해주라 다 단지 첨부 고반다 든들라 바샤줘더라 네 대신 단데we 된담 냠샤라디가라 먼저 냠바샤디가라 된담이 냠바 라 근데 위치기 가서 지기 상승을 직선 찌지 네버 많이 봐 된담배 입에 사지 고만도 다 지기 동반이를 봐 냠바샤라 된담 냠자 냠자를 이거 곰로 전 찌지도 내디니들 냠샤라라 냠자디 대야 가리벨 샤라나 난가다 봐 자체모 근데 진주지라 많이 봐 자체모들 봐샤든 근데 아니 근데 냠네 제와다 근데들아 아니 시르 파신라 그래서라 근데 시르 파신데 아니 조벌 sen질라래다 수수랑지를 제와쇼라로 근데라 먼저 셀로르디가라 파기기 윤대들랑 주고 마시 셀로 라메 셀로 주스래지다 근데로죠.
So now, from the Guru Puja, it reads along the lines of the wisdom that realizes suchness. Suchness refers to the reality itself, as it is, without any conceptual elaborations. The wisdom that realizes suchness brings forth the great bliss. Great bliss herein refers to enlightenment. The wisdom that realizes suchness brings forth the great bliss. And the practice of the yogi, yogi herein referring to the practitioner, the practice of the yogi is to abide in the meditative stabilization on the wisdom. The practice of the yogi is to abide in the space-like meditative absorption. So herein, when we use a term like space-like meditative absorption, it refers to the meditative absorption or meditative equipoise that places itself on the wisdom that realizes reality as it is. Because space itself is free from conceptual elaboration. So that's the kind of metaphor that is used. The practice of the yogi is to place the mind or to abide in the space-like meditative absorption. This is the great perfection of wisdom.
다든데 이니가 저당기 파신라디가라 어떤 고바타산 파신로 될때로 라 네네 가서 근데 이러지 람서 시시제대요 말이네 다 저당기 지난들 남두기 나셔가라마 딘데 신세시라 메바이나 지지는 마차 신세 유결이라 아니 저당기 신데 예사디가 그 레라부 코다테 되오다 근데 인디가 단다처럼서 지금 마시도 산다서지라 러시라차라 디가라 아니 처럼서게 템담을 록 파신 콜라레 라마이 샴바게 순주든데 녀바이나레 데블로바이나레 데네시나니 칼리칼리 신도라.
Now bear in mind that when we are talking about the classical monastic education, then when we study the great perfections, the paramitas, then in the classical monastic setup we spend 7 years studying the paramitas. So at this point, if you do struggle a little bit with it, then it's totally understandable. But with that being said, I think that since all of you are well educated and you have an inquisitive mind, I think as I give these instructions and teachings, I think you are able to understand somewhat of the discussions, and as such you have the basis upon which you build a foundational, some sort of foundation to explore this further. So I encourage you to, if you are interested, to explore it further by referring to other teachings, by reading up on them, to build a better understanding of these 6 perfections.
아무튼 디 고마타산 로드인 카르진타 올라나 짜와요라 짜월로 싱고레 아니 겐자 베티도레 아니 디양 마키오는 심사지들 로르체네 순지라치 바냐도 다리콘레즈 사니콜레즈 나니콜 안데 쯔바친 다샤체오라 근데치데 너무 고고라 다디야 파신치부 말다 딜레르전담을 레전가 투여레 등냠도 자운데가 디즈 맘버지가도 땅고라 단도이네 찍게 양다파서 시스사에 깔레카부르다 이내 다당아도 딜라 라두지 그래서 야보도 칼라나 먼저 파신기 됨장배 자제부 만 대바 mambo 아니 지우치 말 탭토부토부 싱강아르 빼셔 mambo 따야라 딜라 참마서 풍아도 빼 mambo 깔레여레 디서 mambo 고 tanda dhizu ina tal Geshema Dawa dhizu pe nyamlen che pa koran zi pe nganzu la sa chu thun chu ro do ba te ro reda nganzu kamara dambo dil la go mara khasna phashe jun chum chum ba la bi paru tsa asu ma de tsu ji ru zama te ro ne dang yor ra dhizu pe le ya po do khode ro.
So when I say that we spent close to 7 years studying the great perfections, then we do not study the great perfection in it alone. We have to study other texts along with it. But then we, in general, spent almost 7 years, close to 7 years, studying a particular text like the great perfections. And in this, we have to memorize the root texts. And it's not so concise like this. It's with commentaries. And then we have to attend teachings on these texts. And then, not only that, what we understand from the teachings, we have to debate with our fellow classmates to ensure that we have a correct understanding of the teachings. So this is the manner in which we approach our study of the Paramitas. And even after spending 7 years and exploring it extensively in this manner, it's difficult at this point to say that you have come to a full understanding of these teachings. So as such, the effort to approach this text and text again and again must remain throughout our lives. But I find it very, very good that you, as participants, have an opportunity to approach these practices in such concise and accessible manner when you approach it with a text like this, because in the traditional way that we study it, we are not presented with such an easy and accessible text first. We really have to study numerous different commentaries first, and only later on we begin to approach this just to kind of sum up and to create an outline of it. And now for you have the perfect opportunity to understand these practices concisely from the outset. So as such, these great masters have presented them in a manner which is very easy for us to digest. It's almost as if like it's now ready to eat, ready to drink. So we should make an effort to try to understand these and approach them again and again.
안저 금바다나 잔디가 까니 깔이 쇼자오다 쇼응 하고 치지 나와서 lang 아니 론제치 양 론제치 베디아므라 초초로 아 초초만 칼라사는 아니 저런 거 좀으로 쇼기 치지 두 덤바도만 고치도 되도 공다 치지 숨바츠바다 아니 안저 따티버 칼라도 여름시야 저라잖아서 그 차와다 네네 주숨발라 차치당 까마 정아스 동바 찬조고고도 치러처로 치러처야 치든가 봐 두바도 초라 당기막도나 대상 저도에는 가시 아니야 두바 듬바도 칼라사는 양 아주 잠자 초초는 잠자야 뒤치어 칼라 아 진짜 디베죠 디젤라 아니야 지주 마테스트냐 테스트 파선데 동바치도 샤로 샤이나 지차로 추로 동동 야 라조초 지주 구바네 페치바도 아니 주바샤가 주지도 당아서 디바나 소소직 장마로 가르쳐는 소야니 다 드네 짱짱 지네베 로노로 깔레자오라 나서 이마시가 셰르 깔레 카바리네 저한테 따리 치츠직 나로라서 디 참마다 히자라 네 산노다서 마시지라야레 디갈 아니 소소소 데블로 아니 치네 아니 칼리가시라.
So when we were nuns who was studying in the institute, then the schedule itself, the academic schedule itself was very, very hectic. So we have to get up first thing in the morning at 5, and then the first hours of the morning we always dedicate towards memorizing the root text, and then after that you are called to attend the prayer sessions, and after the prayer sessions then maybe you have some time for breakfast, and then when it's 7, then the classes already begin to start, and then from 7 to 3 in the afternoon it's continuous class, only with a break in between for lunch, And then from 3, maybe you get like a 15-minute break for tea. And then after that 15-minute break, then immediately you have to either gather for a prayer session or a congregation or the debate courtyard. And then from 3 until 5, you are engaged either in a prayer session or the debate courtyard. And then from 5 to 6, maybe you have a break for dinner in between. And after that, you gather again in the debate courtyard to train in logical reasoning, to challenge your ideas about the teachings with each other. And after that, maybe you break for dinner, and after that, you again gather for a prayer session. And then from 9 to 10, maybe you get some time for self-study. And after that, then this time for self-study sometimes goes until like 11:30, and it's only around midnight when you get some time for yourself. And then you approach the next day, the same routine follows, and this goes for years and years. So it's so it's intense, and we really have to dedicate ourselves to our study in this manner. But you have an opportunity to approach the teachings in a very accessible manner, in a very concise format. So you...
And to wake up at 8 o'clock.
So as such, maybe we make it a point that it takes some effort to come to a correct understanding of the teachings from our part.
아니 수제시라.
Okay, we break here for tea now.